The night my husband threw me out, I was still wearing the dress I'd hemmed by hand because his mother said my legs were too ordinary for the original cut. I remember that first because it was such a stupid thing to remember. Not the thunder cracking over the driveway, not the way Daniel held the front door open like he was doing me a favor, not the suitcase he tossed onto the wet stone path so hard that one wheel snapped off. I remembered the crooked hem. "Take your clothes and go," he said, standing in the light of the foyer like I was a delivery that had arrived at the wrong address. "Everything else in this house was paid for by me." His mother, Evelyn Mercer, stood a few feet behind him with one hand resting lightly on the banister. She looked immaculate, in pearl earrings and cream silk, like cruelty had its own dress code. "Daniel," I whispered, because I still thought there had been some mistake. "You can't mean this." He laughed once, short and cold. "I filed the papers this afternoon." I stared at him. "You filed for divorce?" "At 3:10, Evelyn said smoothly, as if she were confirming a lunch reservation. The attorney was very efficient. Rain blew into the doorway and spotted the polished marble floor. Daniel looked down at the droplets, not at me. "You embarrassed me tonight," he said, "in front of investors, in front of people I actually need." My mouth went dry. At the gala, I had done nothing but stand beside him, smile when spoken to, and make the mistake of correcting a floor plan detail when one of his partners praised a new luxury development Daniel had presented as his own vision. My vision. A kitchen angled toward natural light, floating stairs in white oak, hidden storage walls, indoor trees where glass met stone. He had once told me my eye for space felt like magic. At the gala, when I gently said, "Actually, the idea came from a coastal restoration concept I drafted last spring," the investor had looked surprised, then interested. Daniel had gone silent for the rest of the night. Now I understood why. "You're throwing me out because I told the truth?" I asked. "I'm throwing me out because you forgot your place," Evelyn said. Daniel didn't correct her. That hurt more than if he had shouted. I took one step toward him. "My place? I built half the presentations your company uses. I staged your model homes. I handled client dinners when you were too arrogant to notice people hated you. I stood beside you when your first project went underwater and your father called you a failure. Don't stand there and act like I was some decoration." His jaw tightened. For 1 second, I thought I saw shame. Then Evelyn spoke again. "You were lucky," she said. "There's a difference." Daniel's eyes hardened. "This is over, Ava." He held out his hand. "Your ring." I looked down at the diamond he had slid onto my finger 3 years earlier in a candlelit restaurant while promising I would never feel alone again. My fingers shook as I pulled it off. He didn't even touch my skin when he took it from me. Then he reached into his pocket and held out my credit card, my phone, the key to the house. One by one, he dropped them into a crystal bowl on the console table. "You can keep your old laptop," he said. "I had Greg wipe any company files." Greg was his head of security. I actually laughed then because something inside me cracked so sharply it sounded like humor. "You had security wipe my laptop before you told me?" "I prepared," he said. That was Daniel. Even betrayal came with project management. Evelyn tilted her head. "The driver can take you to a hotel if you can't arrange something yourself." I looked around the foyer. The house had been staged with my hands. The antique brass lamp in the corner? I had found it at an estate sale and rewired it myself. The runner on the stairs? My choice. The long mirror across from the front door? Hung at exactly that angle because the house needed warmth where money had made everything too sharp. I had left fingerprints on that place that no one could polish away. But none of it mattered, because Daniel had already decided that history belonged to the person with the deed, not the person who made a house breathe. He picked up the suitcase and shoved it toward me. The handle was sticky with rain. "There's $30 in the side pocket," he said. "You can use it for tonight." $30. 3 years of marriage, and my husband sent me out into a storm with one broken suitcase and $30 like he was tipping waitstaff. I bent to pick it up. My left heel slipped on the wet stone, and for one humiliating second, I had to catch myself against the doorframe to keep from falling. Evelyn didn't move. Daniel didn't either. I stood back up slowly and looked at him one last time. "When this comes back to you," I said, my voice so quiet it barely sounded like mine, "don't call it regret. Call it by its real name." He frowned. "What real name?" I met his eyes. "Cowardice." Then I walked out. I made it as far as the iron gate before the wheel snapped off completely. I dragged the suitcase down the sidewalk while rain soaked through my dress and the hem slapped wetly against my calves. A passing car hit a puddle and sent dirty water over my legs. No one stopped. At the bus bench 2 blocks away, I sat down beside my broken suitcase and stared at my reflection in the dark ad glass behind me. Mascara under my eyes, hair pinned on one side, falling loose on the other. A woman who looked like she had been edited out of her own life. I reached into the side pocket. Daniel had been right. There were $30 inside, and tucked underneath it, folded so small I almost missed it, was a pawn slip for my grandmother's locket, the one piece of jewelry I had owned before I met him. My chest tightened. Evelyn had hated that locket, said it looked small-town sentimental. I had hidden it in the back of my dresser months earlier after she mocked it at lunch. Now I held the slip in my hand like a message from a version of myself Daniel had not fully erased. The bus never came. A taxi did. The driver was an older man with tired eyes and a coffee stain on his collar. He looked at me in the rearview mirror, then at the suitcase, and asked softly, "You safe?" That question almost broke me. I nodded because if I said anything at all, I would start crying so hard I might never stop. He took me to the cheapest motel he knew on the edge of downtown and only charged me $20. With the $10 I had left, I bought a vending machine sandwich and a bottle of water. That was how my second life started. In a room that smelled like bleach and old smoke, with soggy shoes on the radiator and a sandwich I couldn't swallow. 3 weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. The clinic was 2 bus rides away and had a flickering fluorescent light in the waiting room that buzzed so loudly it made my teeth ache. When the nurse came back holding the paper, her face softened. "Looks like about 7 weeks, she said. 7 weeks. I sat there staring at the little black and white blur on the monitor, the room going strangely quiet around me. Daniel had thrown me out, carrying his child. For 20 minutes, I forgot to breathe normally. Then, practical panic took over. Rent, work, insurance, a crib, formula, doctor visits, the future. And beneath all of it, a question that felt like a blade under my ribs. Do I tell him? By that afternoon, I had already convinced myself that whatever Daniel had done to me, he had a right to know. I called his number from outside the clinic, standing under a faded awning while buses hissed at the curb. His assistant answered. "Mr. Mercer's office." "This is Ava," I said. "I need to speak to Daniel." There was a pause, keyboard clicks. "He's unavailable." "It's urgent." Another pause, then a voice I knew too well slid onto the line. "Nothing you say is urgent to my son anymore." Evelyn. I felt my stomach drop. "Why are you answering his office phone?" "Because I'm sitting in the office, Ava, where people with value tend to be." I closed my eyes. "I need to tell Daniel something. If this is another appeal for money, don't embarrass yourself. The settlement offer was generous." I gripped the phone harder. I'm pregnant. Silence. Not surprise, not confusion. Silence. Then Evelyn exhaled, almost bored. How inconvenient. A coldness moved through me. You'll tell him, I said. No, she replied. I won't. My heart started pounding. You can't make that decision. Oh, I can make quite a few decisions, dear. Daniel is in St. Bart's with Elise and has finally begun acting like a man who understands his future. Don't poison that with a desperate little trick. This isn't a trick. It's his child. Then if you have any dignity left, you'll handle it quietly. My whole body went still. Handle it quietly? She lowered her voice. You are not tying yourself to this family through an accident. The line went dead. I stood there so long in the heat that a woman with a stroller asked if I needed help. That night, I wrote Daniel a letter. I told him everything. That I was pregnant, that I didn't want money, that I didn't want pity, only truth. I slid the clinic image into the envelope and mailed it certified to his office the next morning. 2 weeks later, it came back unopened with a red stamp across the front. Refused. That was the day I stopped being his wife in my heart. Not the night he threw me out. Not the afternoon he filed papers behind my back. The day he refused to open the envelope that held his child's first picture. I took the motel housekeeping job first because it came with access to leftover toiletries and sometimes abandoned food. Then I picked up evening shifts at a furniture restoration shop owned by a widower named Ben Torres, who had hands like tree bark and a radio that only ever played old country songs. The shop sat between a tire place and a bakery. It smelled like cedar dust, varnish, and burnt coffee. The floor sloped slightly to the left, and one of the back windows rattled whenever trucks passed. It was the first place I had been in months that didn't ask me to apologize for existing. Ben watched me sanding a chipped walnut side table one night and said, "You've done this before." My mother taught me to refinish secondhand furniture when I was a kid, I said. We couldn't afford new. He nodded once. You've got an eye. That simple sentence was worth more to me than Daniel's entire closet of tailored suits. I worked until my ankles swelled. I ate whatever I could afford. I cried in the shower because it was the only place the sound stayed private. At night, I slept with one hand on my stomach and promised a baby the size of a peach that I would build something steadier than fear. A month later, Rosa found me. Rosa had worked in Daniel's house for 11 years. She opened the restoration shop door one rainy Tuesday carrying a grocery bag and wearing sneakers under her uniform skirt. When she saw me, her eyes filled instantly. "Oh, mija," she whispered. I dropped the paintbrush in my hand. Rosa set the bag on the counter and pulled me into a hug that smelled like starch and lavender soap. It was the first time anyone had held me since I was thrown out, and I had to bite the inside of my cheek not to sob against her shoulder. "I shouldn't be here long," she said, wiping her face, "but I brought what I could." Inside the bag were my sketchbooks, my old denim jacket, the locket from the pawn shop redeemed, and a square tin full of folded cash. I looked at her. "Rosa." She pressed my hand closed over the tin. "I sold the watch Mr. Mercer gave me at Christmas. I never liked it." I stared at her, speechless. She lowered her voice. "Your mother-in-law told the staff you left because you had a problem with pills and money. Daniel said nothing." I felt something hot and ugly rise in my throat. Not surprise this time. Clarity. "Thank you," I managed. Rosa's eyes dropped to my stomach. I was barely showing, but she knew. "Does he know?" I tried. Her mouth tightened. Then he chose not to. Before she left, she touched my cheek and said, "Do not disappear, Ava. Some people survive out of spite. That is still survival." I repeated that sentence for months. Some people survive out of spite. My divorce was finalized before my son was born. Daniel never contested anything because there was almost nothing left to fight over. I had no house, no joint accounts, no jewelry, no lawyer on retainer, no family money. By then, I had stopped trying to contact him. Whether out of cowardice or cruelty, he had made his decision clear. When labor started, I was in the shop reupholstering 2 dining chairs for a client who wanted old money without the mildew. My water broke on the concrete floor next to a staple gun. Ben nearly drove through a red light getting me to the hospital. Rosa came. So did Ben's daughter Marisol. Between contractions, I remember staring at the hospital bracelet biting into my wrist and thinking how strange it was that the people who showed up for me had no legal obligation to love me at all. When my son was placed on my chest, everything in me rearranged. He had dark hair, long fingers, and a furious little cry like being born had offended him personally. "Hello, Leo," I whispered. I named him Leo because I wanted something bright for him, something warm. In the weeks after he was born, life became brutally simple. Feed him, burp him, work when I could, sleep when possible, cry less, keep going. The apartment I rented above a laundromat had 1 bedroom, a squeaky floorboard outside the bathroom, and a coffee maker that made a choking sound before it gave in every morning. My dining table was an old workbench Ben cut down for me. 1 chair matched. The other 3 were borrowed from 3 different people and looked like they had lost a fight. It was the happiest home I had ever known, because every single thing in it was honest. One Saturday, Marisol posted a video online of a nursery corner I had made for Leo out of an orange crate, thrifted curtains, and a wall mural I painted by hand after he fell asleep. The clip got shared, then shared again. Then a local lifestyle page asked who had done the room. Soon, someone wanted me to stage a condo. Then a photographer wanted to feature one of my restored pieces. Then a woman named Nia Brooks walked into the shop wearing navy trousers and carrying a leather folder. "I'm listing 6 luxury homes this quarter," she said, "and I'm tired of hiring decorators who know brands but not space. I saw your work. Can you stage a house that doesn't feel like it's trying to impress itself?" I probably should have played it cool. Instead, I said, "Yes." Nia laughed. "Good. Come see me Monday." That job changed everything. I staged the first house with rented art, borrowed plants, 2 repainted dressers, and more nerve than budget. I made the primary bedroom feel like a place where real people might forgive each other. I softened a cold marble kitchen with walnut stools and lemon branches. I turned a dead corner under the staircase into a reading nook that made buyers stop and smile. The house sold in 9 days over asking. Nia sent me 2 more, then 5. Within a year, Ben and I expanded the shop into a design studio. I hired 2 assistants, then 4. I stopped counting quarters for diapers at the grocery store. I bought Leo a proper crib instead of the repurposed bassinet I'd spent weeks pretending was creative. And still, there were nights when I stood at the window with him asleep on my shoulder and wondered if Daniel ever felt even a flicker of what he had thrown away. I hated myself for wondering. The thing about healing is that it doesn't happen in one clean direction. Some days you feel invincible. Other days, a familiar cologne in an elevator can make you feel abandoned all over again. The real turn came 16 months after I was thrown out. A man in a charcoal suit walked into the studio just before lunch and asked, "Are you Ava Bennett?" I tensed automatically at my maiden name. I hadn't heard it spoken by a stranger in years. "Yes?" "I'm Harold Stein from Whitlock and Stein Probate Services. We've been trying to reach you for almost 18 months. My stomach dropped. He handed me a thick envelope. On the front were multiple printed labels with my married address, Daniel's house, each stamped final notice, then return to sender, then address unconfirmed. My fingers went numb opening it. Inside was a formal letter informing me that my maternal grandmother, Eleanor Bennett, had died and left me sole beneficiary of an estate trust. I stared at the words until they blurred. I hadn't seen my grandmother since I was 11. After my mother died, there had been fights, pride, distance, silence. I had told myself there was no one left to come looking for me. I had been wrong. "There's also a property," Harold said carefully. "The trust includes a residence on the coast, plus land and investment accounts. The structure is complex, but conservatively, the estate is worth several million in its current condition." I looked up slowly. "In its current condition?" "It needs restoration," he said. "Extensive restoration." Nia, who had come in for a meeting and overheard the last part, sat down without being invited. "How long were these letters going to her married address?" she asked. Harold glanced at the file. "Signed for repeatedly by one Evelyn Mercer." The room went dead quiet. Not Daniel. Evelyn. Again and again she had signed for letters informing me that I had my own inheritance, my own property, my own escape route. And she had hidden every one of them. The story I had told myself, that they threw me away because they no longer wanted me, was suddenly too small. They had thrown me away because they needed me powerless. I was gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles hurt. Harold pulled out one more document. "There's also this, a letter from your grandmother. She requested it be hand-delivered if possible." My hands shook as I unfolded the paper. "Ava, if this reaches you late, then I have failed twice, once in life and once in death. I was proud when I should have been softer. I mistook silence for strength, and I let the years do cruel work. But I followed your life more than you knew. The magazines mentioned your husband's projects. I recognized your eye in rooms no Mercer man could have imagined alone. The house on Blackwater Cliff belonged to my mother before me. She always said it should go to the woman in the family with both stubbornness and vision. That is you. If the house is broken, restore it. If your heart is broken, live anyway." I had to put the letter down because I couldn't see through the tears. Nia was the one who said it out loud. "They stole time from you." Yes, that was the part that burned. Money mattered. Security mattered. The property mattered. But what I could never get back were those first terrible months. The motel, the clinic, the hunger, the terror of pregnancy. The nights I sat on the bathroom floor calculating formula costs because a woman in pearls had hidden the truth in a desk drawer. Harold arranged for me to see the property 2 days later. Blackwater Cliff stood above the ocean behind iron gates eaten with rust. The house itself was enormous and wounded. 3 stories of weathered stone, cracked terraces, salt-streaked windows, and neglected gardens wild enough to look defensive. Even ruined, it was breathtaking. The front doors groaned when we pushed them open. Inside, dust floated through shafts of light. Furniture stood under white sheets like ghosts waiting to be named. The grand staircase curved up beneath a skylight webbed at one corner. In the library, shelves climbed from floor to ceiling, and one ladder still hung slightly off its rail as if someone had left in a hurry and never returned. Leo sat on my hip, clutching a cracker, and patted my shoulder like he already knew I was overwhelmed. Harold began discussing inspections, appraisals, trust transfers. I barely heard him. I walked through the house room by room and felt something strange rising in me. Not greed, not triumph. Recognition. This house was not a rescue. It was a responsibility. And for the first time in my life, a grand one belonged to me. I restored Blackwater Cliff the same way I rebuilt myself, piece by piece, with bruised patience, and a refusal to let ugly things have the final word. We repaired the roof first, then plumbing, then wiring. I discovered hidden fireplaces, original plaster moldings, and a service staircase tucked behind the kitchen that led to a widow's walk with a view of the entire coastline. I kept what had soul and removed what only screamed money. Naya became my investor on several projects. Ben became head of custom restoration for my growing firm. Marisol ran branding and made me stop apologizing on camera when magazines wanted interviews. Within 24 months, Bennett House Design was staging mansions, restoring heritage properties, and consulting on boutique luxury developments. Blackwater Cliff became my home, my flagship, and eventually the face of everything I had built. By the second spring, one broker valued it at $30 million. $30 million! The woman Daniel once sent away with $30 now owned a mansion worth $1 million for every coin of humiliation he had handed me. And then, because life has a sick sense of timing, Daniel came back. Not to apologize, not at first. He came because he needed something. By then, Mercer Development was in trouble. Everyone in the industry knew it, though people in silk preferred to call it liquidity strain. Daniel's glossy downtown tower had stalled. One of his lenders had walked. Evelyn had pushed him into an absurd acquisition that bled cash. Elise, the elegant woman he had paraded after me, had married a hedge fund manager in Chicago 6 months earlier. I knew all that before I ever saw him, because money travels with gossip attached. What I did not know was that Nia had invited a group of investors, brokers, and developers to a charity evening at Blackwater Cliff to launch my foundation for transitional housing for women and children starting over after displacement. My kind of displacement. Daniel arrived thinking he was attending a networking event hosted by a silent partner named A. Bennett Holdings. He did not know A stood for Ava. I watched him on the security monitor in the upstairs sitting room before I went down. He had more gray at his temples than I remembered. Less certainty in the shoulders. The same expensive posture. Beside him, Evelyn stepped out of the car in silver silk, still carrying herself like the world owed her aisle space. For a second, all the old hurt stood up inside me. Then Leo ran past the doorway below, chasing a paper airplane one of the staff had made for him, and the hurt settled into something steadier. Purpose. I came down the staircase just as Daniel was looking at the portrait wall in the foyer. He turned at the sound of my heels and stopped. People talk about shock like it's loud. It isn't. Real shock is silent. His face emptied, then filled, then emptied again. "Ava?" he said. I smiled politely, the same way I might have smiled at a contractor arriving 10 minutes late. "Welcome to my home, Daniel." Evelyn actually grabbed the edge of the console table. For one exquisite second, neither of them could speak. Then Daniel looked around the foyer, the restored staircase, the original mirror, the carved table with white orchids, and finally back at me. "This is your house?" I tilted my head. "You sound surprised." Evelyn found her voice first. "How did you get this place?" There it was. Not congratulations. Not you look well. Not are you happy. How? As if success in my hands required an audit. "It was left to me," I said, though I understand the notices had some trouble reaching me. Daniel's eyes shifted to his mother so fast it would have been funny if it weren't so ugly. Evelyn's jaw tightened. "This is neither the time nor place." "No," I said softly. "Actually, it's both." Daniel took a step toward me. "Ava, I had no idea." "Of course you didn't," I replied. "Knowing things would have required listening." His face changed at that. Not anger. Wound. Good. He deserved at least one. Before he could answer, a small voice called, "Mom!" Leo came barreling in from the terrace in tiny loafers and a blue sweater, cheeks flushed with too much sugar and ocean air. He reached me and threw his arms around my legs. I bent to pick him up. Daniel stared. Leo's hair was dark like mine, but his eyes were Daniel's. I saw the recognition hit him like a physical blow. He looked at Leo, then at me, then back again. His hand loosened at his side as if he had forgotten how fingers worked. "How old is he?" he asked, and his voice was no longer the polished one he used in boardrooms. It sounded stripped raw. 2, I said. He inhaled sharply. Evelyn stepped in at once. "Daniel." But it was too late. He knew. The room around us still moved. Glasses clinking, soft piano from the terrace, servers crossing with trays. But inside that circle of air, everything had narrowed to one impossible truth. "You never told me," he whispered. A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Not a happy one. The kind that comes from old pain finding new irony. "I wrote to you from a clinic parking lot," I said. "I mailed you his first picture. Your office refused the letter." Daniel turned so slowly toward his mother that even Evelyn looked alarmed. "What is she talking about?" Evelyn's mouth flattened. "This is not a conversation for tonight." "Ava," he said, not taking his eyes off Evelyn. "What letter?" I held his gaze now, not hers. "The one I sent when I was 7 weeks pregnant. Certified mail. It came back unopened." Color left his face. Evelyn gave me a look of pure hatred then because she realized the one thing she couldn't manage in real time was truth. "Daniel," she said sharply, "your guests are waiting." "You signed for probate notices in my name too," I said. 18 months of them. Around us, voices had started to quiet. Not fully. Just enough for social people to pretend they weren't listening while listening to everything. Daniel looked between us like the floor had shifted under him. "Mother," he said. She lifted her chin. "I protected this family." "No," I said. "You protected control." Leo touched my necklace. "Mom, who's that?" I kissed his hair. "Just someone from a long time ago." Daniel flinched as if I'd slapped him. I should have felt satisfaction. Maybe I did. But under it, there was grief, too. Grief for the man I had once loved. Grief for the father my son had never had. Grief for the simpler version of justice where pain balances pain and nobody innocent gets caught between. Nia appeared beside me with perfect timing and said brightly, "Ava, the trustees are ready when you are." I nodded. "Thank you." Then I looked at Daniel one last time before walking toward the terrace. "If you want the rest of the truth," I said quietly, "stay." I gave my speech with the ocean behind me and the lights of the city trembling in the distance. I spoke about temporary housing and permanent humiliation, about how quickly a woman can become a problem once she stops being useful, about children who begin life in borrowed rooms, about dignity not being charity but structure. I did not use Daniel's name. I did not need to. When I announced that the Foundation's first property would be a restored 12-unit residence for displaced mothers and children, the applause felt less like praise and more like something cleaner. Witness. Afterward, while guests moved inside for dessert, Harold Stein approached Daniel with a file. I hadn't asked him to do it publicly. Harold had chosen that for himself. "I believe you'll want to see these, Mr. Mercer," he said. Inside the file were copies of the returned pregnancy letter, the delivery receipts signed by Evelyn, and the probate notices she had intercepted. There were also internal emails from Mercer Development discussing one of my original coastal layouts, the same one Daniel had showcased the night he threw me out. The metadata traced the files to my old laptop before Greg wiped it. Then, who had learned more about digital backups from his daughter than Daniel's security team apparently knew, had recovered versions months earlier when I needed proof for a licensing dispute. Daniel read in silence, then again. Then he looked at me across the room with such naked devastation that for the first time in years, I believed he truly hadn't known the full extent of what his mother had done. But innocence wasn't available to him, not after the way he had chosen power over listening. He crossed the library where Evelyn stood speaking to two investors and said, clear enough for half the room to hear,
"Did you intercept letters from Ava?"
Evelyn smiled too quickly. Daniel, please.
"Did you?"
Her smile vanished. I handled what needed handling. He stared at her.
Did you send back the letter about my son? Your son? One of the investors repeated faintly. Evelyn's face went hard as polished stone. I prevented a mistake from becoming leverage. The room went still. Daniel took a slow step back from her, like proximity itself had become dangerous. That was my child. That was a trap, Evelyn snapped, and she would have ruined you. She was already trying to outshine you publicly. Once she had independent money and a baby, you'd have been tied to her forever. I watched Daniel absorb that, not just the words, the worldview underneath them, the one he had been raised inside and too often obeyed. Then he did the one thing I hadn't expected. He took off his Mercer Development signet ring and set it on the library table between them. If this is what protecting the family looks like, he said, voice shaking, then maybe this family deserves to lose everything. Evelyn's face blanched. One of the investors quietly walked away, then another. Social death makes very little noise. It sounds like shoes changing direction. Daniel turned to me again, and all the old power was gone from him. What remained was a man seeing the wreckage of his own passivity all at once. I am sorry is a small sentence when it arrives years late, but he said it anyway. Ava, he said, and his voice broke on my name. I don't know if I have the right to ask anything from you. I know I don't. But please don't let me walk out of here tonight not knowing him. I looked at Leo, who was in the corner constructing a tower out of sugar cubes under Marisol's supervision. Then I looked back at Daniel. When I begged to be heard, you chose the easier story, I said. When I was carrying your child, you let your mother answer for you. When I had nothing, you made sure I had less. He closed his eyes. I know. No, I said. You know now. That is not the same thing. He accepted that without protest. That, more than anything, told me he had changed at least enough to feel shame honestly. I walked over to Leo and crouched beside him. Sweetheart, would you like to say hello to someone? Leo looked up at Daniel curiously. The man with my eyes? Every adult in earshot stopped breathing. Children tell the truth before decorum gets there. I smiled despite myself. Yes. Leo stood, dusted sugar from his hands, and regarded Daniel with the solemnity only little boys and very old men can carry convincingly. Hi, he said. Daniel knelt like his knees had given out on their own. Hi, he whispered back. Leo studied him for a long moment. Are you sad? Daniel gave a strangled laugh and a sound that was almost a sob. Yes. Leo considered that.
Then he held out one sugar cube. This one is extra. Daniel took it like it was the most precious thing he had ever been offered. That was the closest thing to mercy I had in me that night. Over the next 3 months, Daniel came every Saturday at 10, not once late. Not once with Evelyn. The first few visits happened in the garden with me present, then at the beach below the cliff, then in the breakfast room where Leo would line up toy boats and ask impossible toddler questions about seagulls and shadows and whether whales got lonely. Daniel answered every one as if being allowed to hear them was a privilege, because it was. He sold his share in Mercer Development, publicly severed ties with Evelyn, cooperated with the civil action over my stolen design files and the mail interference. He moved into a rental townhouse without staff, without a gate, without anyone arranging his image. The tabloids had a field day for a week, then found shinier people to chew on. Real change is rarely glamorous. It looks like showing up without applause. Do not mistake this for a fairy tale. Daniel and I did not fall back into each other's arms because one dramatic confrontation washed away 3 years of arrogance and 2 years of absence. Life does not honor pain by pretending it never happened. But I will tell you this. The first time Leo got sick with a fever after Daniel re-entered his life, Daniel stayed in the downstairs guest room, unasked, because he wanted to help through the night. At 3 a.m., I came into the kitchen to find him sitting at the table in socks and an old t-shirt, reading pediatric dosage instructions 3 times because he was afraid of getting one number wrong. There was no audience for that moment. No investors, no mother, no image to protect. Just a man trying, too late, but truly, to become safe. I stood there longer than I meant to. He looked up and said quietly, "I know I don't deserve the chance to learn this, but thank you for letting me." I didn't answer right away. Then I poured 2 cups of coffee and slid one toward him. Not forgiveness, not even close, but not nothing. A year after the night of the gala, the foundation opened its first residence. Ben built the dining tables. Marisol painted murals in the children's room. Nia handled the legal mess of city approvals like she enjoyed combat. Harold cried at the ribbon cutting and blamed pollen. Blackwater Cliff still stands above the ocean, bright-windowed and stubborn. Some mornings I walk its halls barefoot before Leo wakes up, touching the banister, the library ladder, the warm stone near the kitchen where the sun lands first. I think about the woman in the rain with the broken suitcase and the crooked hem and the $30. I want to go back and tell her something. Not that she will become rich. Not that the man who discarded her will one day stand in her house and realize what he lost. Not even that she will survive. I want to tell her this. The humiliation will not be the end of the story, because that is what people like Daniel and Evelyn count on. Not just your suffering, but your belief that suffering has rewritten your worth. They are wrong. Sometimes the house you were thrown out of is the fire that leads you home. Daniel and I are not together now. Maybe we never will be. Some wounds change shape, but they do not disappear because apology arrives dressed in sincerity. What we have instead is harder and in some ways more honorable. The slow construction of trust around a child who deserved better than either of our pain. Leo knows who his father is. He also knows who built the life he lives in. And Daniel knows that every room in this mansion, every beam restored, every window reopened, every impossible inch of it, stands because the woman he once reduced to $30 refused to stay small. So tell me honestly, if someone broke you when you were most vulnerable, but came back years later changed, humbled, and truly remorseful, would you give them a place in your child's life? Or would that door stay closed forever?